COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement have had a profound impact in the United States and other countries around the world. It has tested the patience of human beings, made clear the racial and economic disparities that have always existed in society, provided a glimpse into the unyielding philosophical differences between those on the left and those on the right, and illustrated some people's attraction to conspiratorial theories and deep state rather than adherence to the truth and faith in science. Perhaps most importantly, COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement have offered us a glimpse into the best and worst in humanity and led to much speculation as to what the future holds as a result of the thousands of deaths and unprecedented racial upheaval. To a great extent, this is the perfect time to pause and reassess professional practices, to reflect on where we have been, what we are currently doing, and where we might head if we are to be an impactful professional field. Although the watershed events in our history have all caused us to contemplate the essence of life, the sheer number of deaths resulting from COVID-19, and parallel unmasking of the truth regarding those groups most vulnerable to the pandemic because of age and pre-existing conditions, have all combined to foster an environment especially conducive to musing about our present condition and our future. This being the case, what is the present condition of kinesiology, and what direction should it move in the future to ensure its effectiveness in serving others? To answer that question, I suggest we start by utilizing an analogy provided by mathematician and physicist Freedom Dyson regarding the need for both focused frogs and visionary birds. Dyson makes a point in his 2009 article in Notices of the American Mathematical Society that birds fly high in the air and survey broad vistas of mathematics out to the far horizon and delight in concepts that unify our thinking and bring together diverse problems from different parts of the landscape. Frogs, on the other hand, delight in the details of particular objects, and they solve problems one at a time. Dyson, while admitting to being a frog, does not value frogs over birds because they see deeper, or birds over frogs because they see farther. The vastness of the world and the fact that it is both broad and deep requires that frogs and birds work together to explore it. Deeply troubling to Dyson, however, is that science is training more and more frogs focused on narrowly defined specialty areas who are unable to change as science itself does. He concludes, it is a hazardous situation for young people and also for the future of science. Dyson's analogy is particularly important in my view because its message most accurately describes the current status of kinesiology. We are overflowing with focused frogs and have far too few visionary birds. How did we get to such a place? It is a familiar story by now, or should be a familiar story by now. In his 1963 book, The Miseducation of American Teachers, James Kerner claimed that faculty were intellectually inferior. Students spent far too much time on methods courses, and trivial subjects like physical education did not belong in higher education. In the same year, James B. Conant, the former president of Harvard University, noted in his book, The Education of American Teachers, that he was not very impressed with the field of physical education and recommended that graduate programs in the area should be discontinued. This suggestion, coming from such a high-profile and respected academician as Conant, was deeply troubling to those in physical education. many of whom were already concerned about the lack of respect shown in the field. Among those who responded to Conant, no one proved more important and has such a long-lasting impact as Franklin Henry, the eminent motor control specialist. Just a year after Conant's book was published, Henry made the case, originally in a presentation at the 1964 conference of the National College Physical Education Association for Men, that physical education was a scholarly field that generated and disseminated knowledge and not a profession that trained physical educators and coaches. He asserted the field was an academic discipline, grounded in theory and organized around a distinct body of knowledge, collectively embraced in a formal course of learning. This knowledge was constituted of certain portions of such diverse fields as anatomy, physics and physiology, cultural anthropology, history and sociology, as well as psychology. Henry's statement was the most visible and coherent regarding the discipline of physical education, increasingly being discussed in the 1960s by faculty and other institutions across the country. Influenced by the Cold War-inspired dialogue regarding the importance of science, prominent people in physical education proffered their views on what constituted the knowledge base, how it should be disseminated, and to what ends it served. In the early 1960s, both the American Academy of Physical Education, now National Academy of Kinesiology, and Big Ten Body of Knowledge Symposium offered position statements as to what comprised the body of knowledge in physical education. Those individuals associated with those subdomain identified by the Big Ten Body of Knowledge Symposium, along with a few other subdomains, formed their own discipline-specific organizations. These organizations, all of whom hold annual conferences and sponsor their own scholarly journals, have added significantly to the body of knowledge, contributed to the prominence of the field, and provided a deeper understanding of human movement, physical activity, and sport in all their various forms. Unfortunately, rather than uniting the field, as Henry certainly intended, these organizations ultimately helped lead the fragmentation and splintering of physical education into individual domains with seemingly no connection to one another. In essence, more frogs, fewer birds. The lack of integration and withering away of common purposes and goals alienated scholars, many of them identifying more closely with faculty in paired disciplines, rather than colleagues in the physical education departments in which they were officially housed. The lack of integration and withering away of common purposes and goals coalesced with other factors, including the decreasing number of students majoring in physical education that resulted in the downsizing or elimination of teacher training programs. The lack of integration and withering away of common purposes and goals, moreover, led to debates during the 1980s and beyond about the most appropriate names for academic programs, once titled physical education, whether the field was a discipline or a profession, and what should be the core curriculum for students to ensure they have a better understanding of the complexities of the rapidly changing field of study. Of all the aforementioned issues, it is the question about the most appropriate academic preparation of students in a field now typically known under the umbrella term kinesiology, rather than physical education, that is, in my view, most crucial to understand and impactful for the long-term health of the profession. Both individual academicians and national organizations have weighed in on the matter and proposed undergraduate curriculums with specific educational objectives and measurable competencies for kinesiology students in an attempt to overcome the seemingly immutable disciplinary silos that have been established. A milestone event in this matter took place in February 2009 in Orlando, Florida, where the American Kinesiology Association gathered at their annual conference to discuss re-examining the undergraduate core in kinesiology in a time of change. This historic meeting is especially significant in that it was the first time in over 40 years that a collective effort had been made to identify an undergraduate core in kinesiology. The upshot of the meeting was the creation of an undergraduate core of kinesiology, designed to ensure undergraduate majors in the field share a common knowledge base. The core is based on the belief in the need for physical activity across the lifespan and includes 4 content areas: physical activity and health, wellness and quality of life, scientific foundations of physical activity, cultural, historical, and philosophical dimensions of physical activity, and the practice of physical activity. The AKA's development of an undergraduate core has certainly reminded academicians of the interdisciplinary nature of the field and the need to think broadly when studying the theories and assessing the policies and practical implications of physical activity programs. It has also encouraged faculty in the field to reevaluate and philosophize about current practices. The suggested AKA undergraduate core has also been designed in the hope of changes being made to kinesiology programs across the country, with dedicated faculty doing their best to expose students to the various specialization areas constituting the field. In large part, then, the AKA has, like the National Academy of Kinesiology, implicitly emphasized a broad and inclusive vision for kinesiology. However, based on my, albeit unscientific, review of selected undergraduate physical kinesiology curriculums in the United States, there seems to be very few undergraduate programs that fully encompass the 4 broad knowledge categories included in the AKA undergraduate core. And I seriously questioned if the claim that the specializations in kinesiology have a synergistic relationship with one another is more aspirational rather than based on fact. With a few notable exceptions, the majority of AKA member institutions do fairly well in covering the scientific foundations and practice of physical activity, as well as the broader concepts of health and wellness, but pay far less attention to the cultural, historical, and philosophical dimensions of physical activity. Perhaps the overriding factor for the relatively little attention given to the cultural, historical, and philosophical dimensions of physical activity have to do with the lower status of these fields and their perceived lack of immediate applicability, qualitative rather than quantitative approach to knowledge production, and limited potential to secure research funding. It is also partly a result of the 1996 Surgeon General Report on Physical Activity and Health that led to the notion of exercise is medicine, and de-emphasis on the humanities, as well as priority given to STEM education. The 2009 Barack Obama Educate to Innovate campaign, intended to encourage students to study science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It is, moreover, partly a result of the de-emphasis on the arts and humanities in education more generally in American culture, a movement that philosopher Martha Nussbaum has termed the silent crisis. She contends, and it is difficult to argue otherwise, that as nations search for national profit, the arts and humanities, the fields that teach the very qualities that are crucial to democracy itself, are de-emphasized and pared down. The marginalization of the cultural, historical, and philosophical areas of study are not just reflected in kinesiology curriculums, but in an assortment of other ways as well, some more subtle than others. One obvious example is the replacement of retired faculty in these areas with individuals from other disciplinary fields of study. Two less obvious examples of the marginalization of these fields can be gleaned from the faculty variables employed in the National Academy of Kinesiology's evaluation of doctoral programs and changes in the editorial composition of the Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport. In establishing its rankings, the National Academy of Kinesiology apparently has no regard for books, the coin of the realm in historical research, as noted by historian Jamie Schultz. The devaluing of the historian's craft by the National Academy of Kinesiology leadership, while at once extolling science over other ways of knowing, is made clear by the organization's decision to count book chapters 5% in assessing the quality of doctoral programs, the same weight given presentations, and far less than the 20% awarded journal publications and 26% awarded research funding. The organization awards no credit for books. And what kind of shape is shape in when the Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport, its long-running and prestigious scholarly outlet, purports to publish research on the art and science of human movement, when not one member of the journal's editorial board has, as best I can tell, any background in sociology, philosophy, or history. That is a far cry from the Research Quarterly from Exercise and Sport of yesteryear, which strove to be interdisciplinary in nature, as reflected in its diverse editorial board and publications. The limited role given to cultural, historical, and philosophical dimensions of physical activity has negative consequences, it seems to me, not least of which is the lack of a true interdisciplinary approach to the field deemed necessary for its success by a host of academicians, and the fact it could potentially lead to a collective amnesia and lack of self-reflection detrimental to the profession. Equally important, it does not adequately allow for the deep literacy that neuroscientist Marianne Wolf convincingly argues is essential in fostering imagination, empathy, self-reflection, and critical thinking. That kinesiology has gradually evolved over the years into an area of study marked off by distinct subdisciplines, or what has been referred to as silos and bunkers, but now perhaps more accurately termed silos within silos and bunkers within bunkers, but now perhaps should not come as a surprise to anyone, as it is obviously the way of the world. Because of mass technology, rapid acceleration of knowledge production, and elevated value attached to expertise and achievement, virtually every field, including all of those in the university, have seen an acceleration in specialization and increase in narrowly prepared professionals who rarely venture out of their identified areas of study. In fact, the system is organized to reward, both financially and through promotions, productive, focused frogs. I have been concerned about the splintering and fracturing of our field, which is evident anecdotally via name changes and alterations in curriculums, and in the production and packaging of new knowledge. Most senior faculty can identify with the struggles that invariably take place during promotion and tenure committee meetings when trying to assess the qualifications of candidates representing diverse areas of specialization. Unable to actually assess the quality of a candidate's credentials because of a lack of a common language and different methodological approaches, Committee members typically resort to counting rather than reading publications, and depending on the all-important impact factor and external letters to determine if someone will be awarded tenure and or promoted to the next academic rank. Evidence of the splintering of the field has also been brought home to me by the relatively low numbers of unsolicited manuscripts submitted to Kinesiology Review. As my predecessors as editor-in-chief of the journal can attest, the limited number of unsolicited manuscripts received by Kinesiology Review continues to be an issue, which fortunately has been offset by a series of special issues devoted to topics of particular interest to the readership. The lack of an impact factor certainly contributes to the limited number of unsolicited submissions to Kinesiology Review. But I am convinced there is a more troubling and not easily solvable reason for it. Unlike other scholarly journals in the field, Kinesiology Review is intentionally broad in scope, soliciting manuscripts that are evaluative and critical in nature. Perhaps most important, Kinesiology Review most values, as made explicit in its mission statement, integrative research reviews that develop connections between areas of research. In my view, Kinesiology Review asks academicians to pen essays. They are generally ill-prepared and not particularly interested in writing. It is a laudable mission and one that should not be abandoned. But the academic preparation of kinesiologists typically commits them to a particular disciplinary framework with little encouragement or any incentives for that matter to develop connections between areas of research. Yet one more piece of evidence of the splintering of the field are the relatively lack of intense debates currently taking place in kinesiology. With a few notable exceptions, most significantly the discipline versus professional debate of several years ago. And what name to use to describe the field, intense wrangling and disputes that take place now are typically confined to particular subdisciplinary areas rather than kinesiology as a whole. This is certainly a far cry from the passionate debates that used to take place when members more closely identified with the field, viewing it in familiar terms, characterized by a common language and sharing of similar concerns and problems. Important to remember is that these concerns and problems were typically conveyed during large national conferences rather than in small specialty conferences attended by individuals with one particular disciplinary focus. I am, of course, not the only academician to point out the fractured nature of the field and call for an interdisciplinary approach to the study of physical activity, exercise, sport, and other human movement forms. In fact, I am just the latest in the long line of individuals who have argued for and attempted to encourage interdisciplinary study in kinesiology for the sake of students and success of the field. One important example of this was the 2019 meeting of the National Academy of Kinesiology, organized by Brad Hatfield, longtime chair of the kinesiology department at the University of Maryland, who can rightfully be classified as a visionary bird. Organized around the topic optimization of human performance, 13 academicians representing a diverse area of disciplinary perspectives each spoke eloquently about the subject from their particular vantage point. A unique feature of the meeting was a closing session in which all the contributors came together to engage in a dialogue focused on the importance of integration and an interdisciplinary framework to kinesiology. Although a noble, important, and praiseworthy exercise, my impression as one of the attendees was how extraordinarily difficult it was for the 13 focused frogs to connect with one another and truly engage in a meaningful discussion that made clear they were part of the same profession. I came away from the meeting heartened by the fact that a legitimate effort had been made to bring individuals from diverse disciplinary perspectives together to address the important topic of human performance, but also departed thinking we have some unfinished business to take care of, and that creating synergy among our members was characterized by a complexity that would not be solved merely through the passage of time. With this in mind, how does kinesiology move forward in the current environment, not just as a matter of survival, but in an effort to flourish and be relevant in an increasingly complicated and constantly changing world? Because of the uncertainty in America and virtually everywhere else around the globe, it is a very difficult question to answer with any degree of certainty or conviction. As is customary during times of crisis, however, it is imperative, it seems to me, for leaders in the field to reassess current practices, consider alternative ways of doing things, and engage those in the profession in an extended discussion about goals and what it is they want. To use a concept coined by Northern white philanthropist in 1896, but made famous by legendary African-American intellectual and civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois, kinesiology's talented 10th should shoulder the responsibility of uplifting the field in any way they can and by all means necessary. Although aiming his comments at elite African-American men mired in rigid racial segregation at the turn of the 20th century, and in direct opposition to Booker T. Washington's emphasis on industrial education, Du Bois' belief that 1 out of 10 men in the Black community needed to become leaders through a classical form of education and become directly involved in social change is advice that ought to be heeded by those of us in kinesiology. The talented 10th in kinesiology, men and women leaders in the field, are ideally suited to uplift the profession and positively impact communities at the local, regional, and national levels. It is imperative, though, that those leaders represent historically Black colleges and universities, and not just predominantly white institutions. For too long, the center of the kinesiological universe has been predominantly white institutions, with little regard or appreciation for how historical Black colleges have impacted the field, provided a home for minority faculty, and served literally thousands of students during the era of racial segregation and beyond. Kinesiology must make a consistent and ongoing effort to be supportive of and provide equal opportunities for people of color, not only because it's the right thing to do, but for the sake of its future. The field must stay vigilant in ensuring racial equality while at once recognizing the interconnectedness among social and economic disparities and other issues and concerns, including the current pandemic that is occupying the attention of the American public. Having said that, it is important that kinesiologists first take seriously the insights provided by David Epstein in his book Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. Epstein counters the popular notion that to realize genuine excellence in any field, one has to begin specializing very early in life and continue to do so. He argues in convincing detail utilizing the works of the previously mentioned Freeman Dyson and a host of other thinkers, that this view is wrong, and becoming a Nobel laureate or champion in sport or music virtuoso does not necessitate early and narrow specialization. On the contrary, generalists, who are often criticized, granted little respect, and disparaged for being jack of all trades and master of none, are in many instances actually better positioned than specialists to be successful and realize genuine excellence. In Epstein's view, excellence and well-roundedness complement one another, and breadth is the ally of depth rather than its polar opposite. Interestingly, for those in the sciences, the evidence makes clear that individuals should aspire to breadth throughout their academic careers. In fact, armed with convincing data to support his claims, Epstein points out that students who take an interdisciplinary range of courses are much better at thinking in an analogical fashion. Researchers armed with an idiosyncratic knowledge base write more impactful papers. And Nobel laureates are 22 times more likely than their less acknowledged peers to engage in artistic pursuits outside their chosen field of study. Epstein does not, it is important to note, disparage specialists. He has great respect for focused frogs, recognizing their importance in expanding the body of knowledge and contributing to science and scholarly inquiry. But in the end, he argues that many of the most gratifying areas of life, generalists or visionary birds, are in a better position to excel and be successful. Against this backdrop, I believe kinesiology should do more to nourish visionary birds. The profession, it seems to me, stands a better chance to be impactful and contribute positively to society if it included more members who, in the words of psychologist Christopher Conlon, traveled on an 8-lane highway rather than down a single-lane, one-way street. Individuals with range are seemingly far less likely than specialists to become dogmatic methodologically, turn a blind eye to different techniques, and search for information to support their own views. If Epstein is correct, those with range would be beneficial to the field in that they are more prone to collaborate and exhibit active open-mindedness and science curiosity rather than science knowledge. They could add immeasurably to the profession if they joined with focused frogs, recognizing the potential advantages to kinesiology, not just in regards to improvement in scholarship, but teaching and service as well, if its members approach their work as a team game rather than a solitary activity. I have no doubt leaders in kinesiology are committed to providing equal opportunities for everyone and open to the idea of cultivating an environment where both focused frogs and visionary birds can thrive. As to how that environment is established, and more importantly, what it would look like, is not as easy to ascertain. With that said, it is worth repeating that the American Kinesiology Association has done a great service to the field by suggesting a core curriculum that emphasizes an interdisciplinary approach to the study of physical activity. But I'm also of the opinion that if we are to broaden anyone's range, we must acknowledge that everyone develops at different rates, and there is no substitute for experimentation and exploration and possessing the faith to change. We know this is true for athletes, some exhibiting extraordinary talents at a very young age in a singular activity, while others blossoming later in life and achieving greatness in one sport after trying their hand at many others. For every Serena Williams, there is an athlete like Baseball Hall of Famer Tom Seaver, who had a 4.4 pitching record as a high school senior. A similar type of career trajectory is not uncommon in academia, with some of our most productive scholars freely admitting relatively poor performances during their early school days and only realizing success in their chosen field following multiple changes in major and course selections. Be that as it may, if I had the opportunity to live my life backwards, I hopefully would not succumb to the pressure to declare a major at such an early age and sought out more experiences both within and outside the walls of academia. In hindsight, specializing at such an early age in physical education has caused me to wonder what I may have missed academically and what I may have lost. Are we forcing the next generations of kinesiologists to pursue the same path? If I had the opportunity to live my life backwards, I would be far more understanding of my colleagues who never adhered to a specific line of research. In hindsight, I recognize more than ever the quality of an individual's research portfolio might actually be enhanced if it is broader in context and more accessible. Are we adequately encouraging younger colleagues to pursue that course? Finally, if I had the opportunity to live my life backwards, I would push back against the administration at my former institution, who consistently advised younger faculty to focus on their teaching and research, while insisting that service, which historically has been such a guiding principle of our field, would take care of itself. In hindsight, I am of the opinion that faculty, irrespective of the stage of their careers, are capable of and owe it to themselves and their colleagues to strive for genuine excellence in the three areas of research, teaching, and service. The three areas are, of course, not mutually exclusive, in spite of the fact we typically talk about them as if they were separate entities and erroneously judge them as such. In the end, kinesiology needs, in my opinion, to hold up as models and provide opportunities for faculty to learn about the leaders of the past if the field is to flourish following the pandemic and racial unrest currently sweeping the globe. While recognizing we live in a different time and at the risk of waxing nostalgic and using as examples only the most accomplished leaders in our field, I believe it is imperative we showcase them as symbols of possibilities, as many of them had extraordinary range, so desperately needed at this moment in our history. I cannot emphasize enough the historical importance of studying individuals, because it will help us better understand the changes that have taken place in our field over time, serve as inspiration, and perhaps most importantly, provide a much needed sense of professional identity. Like philosophy itself, historical assessments of individuals provide opportunities for self-reflection and to ponder broader issues of moral values, fairness, and meaning. Looking to great figures from the past will not, of course, guarantee the success of kinesiology. But having a better understanding of their lives and a history of the field more generally can perhaps keep each of us in kinesiology from turning into a leaf who doesn't know it's part of a tree. And in the words of the United States' first poet laureate, Robert Penn Warren, give us a fuller understanding of ourselves and of our common humanity so that we can better face the future. And what a future it promises to be. The one thing we can be assured of is the world will never be the same as a result of the pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement. Every institution has been impacted in one way or another, and the notion of American exceptionalism has taken on new meaning, with our strengths and limitations exposed like open wounds for everyone to see. Institutions of higher learning will certainly be altered by the pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement, with some schools likely to close, others to merge simply to survive, and yet others searching for ways to stay financially viable, while at once maintaining the integrity of their academic programs and offering the best education possible for their students. Under these circumstances, I hope we can prepare students who think more broadly and possess the diverse skills required to achieve success not only in kinesiology and other allied health fields, but in other professions if they so choose. We do a disservice to our students, it seems to me, if we merely focus on training and not a more liberal form of education, especially knowing that success in life is largely based on adjustments and increasingly having to navigate occupational transitions. Although perhaps not as intense an experience as an athlete transitioning out of sport, the majority of our students will be required to cope with adjustments, and those successfully able to do so are perhaps those that know themselves and understand who they really are. Importantly, those qualities are, as Buddhist and many other traditional religions would contend, the key to happiness, which kinesiology has unfortunately devoted little attention to over the years during its quest to ensure individuals are dutifully adhering to exercise regimens and proper health habits. I hope we can prepare students who think more broadly and recognize that an understanding of past events will not allow us to predict the future, but can expand our horizons and remind us that of the possibilities for the field moving forward are endless and not predestined. As dire as the current circumstances happen to be, if history has taught us anything, it is the choices we make during any crisis can have a lasting impact for years to come. The lesson to be learned is that amidst all the current constraints and horror and deaths, unique opportunities are always at hand for collective action, guided by the principles of inclusiveness and service and honesty. It is in this spirit, I would suggest that those of us in kinesiology, while essential that we be cognizant of unanticipated constraints, as well as the seemingly serendipitous nature of life, should spend far more time mapping strategy, setting goals, contemplating the questions that need to be asked, and assessing what we want to be as a professional field. Anything short of this, if not irresponsible, very short-sighted, and even self-defeating. Ultimately, we need to engage in what historian Eddie Glob Jr. has termed a critical inventory of who we take ourselves to be. I also hope we can prepare students who think more broadly and take seriously the importance of seizing the day and enjoying the pleasures of the moment, or said another way, to live life on the wing. Individuals whose lives are well lived are those that plan for the future and respect the past, but also complement their lives with a playful curiosity and a recognition of their own mortality that leads them to seek out a variety of experiences, try new things, and make each day special. Accompanying and ultimately enriching this approach must be a genuine concern for helping all people, as Hal Lawson and others have so eloquently pointed out. Helping people must be a comprehensive concept, with individuals of varying colors and different social-cultural backgrounds needing to be an integral part of kinesiology, and provided the same services and privileges and rewards as everyone else if the profession is to realize its full potential. Helping people must be an all-encompassing concept based on the understanding that the artificially contrived divisions we have created have their advantages, but more often than not inhibit interdisciplinary approaches dealing with large issues and concerns. Helping people must be a wide-ranging concept, founded on the principle that the field is more likely to remain essential if it assumes the role of an octopus and has its many arms tethered in some way to the university, local community, region, and nation. Isolation is not effective in normal times, only during pandemics. Finally, I hope we can prepare students who think more broadly and realize any life well lived, and those include most visionaries, is sprinkled with multiple failures and disappointments and setbacks. Everyone experiences failures in their lives that test their resolve, and in some cases are excruciatingly painful and disheartening. My advice to all kinesiology students is that they should, if not necessarily embrace failure, recognize its redemptive power, and that it can potentially lead to changes and alterations in approach that will lead to improvements in their lives and make them that much more effective and impactful. The most successful people I know have turned failure on its head, using it, learning from it, energized and motivated by it, rather than crippled by it. Examples of this are many and varied. Home run king Babe Ruth struck out 1,330 times during his legendary baseball career. The great hoopster Michael Jordan was cut from his high school's varsity basketball team as a sophomore. Thomas Edison was told by his teachers he was too stupid to learn anything. Oprah Winfrey was born to a single mother and lived in poverty for much of her life before becoming a television mogul and multi-billionaire. An Academy Award-winning director, Steven Spielberg, was rejected multiple times by the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. In all, kinesiology needs the rather odd-looking amphibians with the smooth-looking, moist skin and bulging eyes who like to burrow deeply in the mud, as well as the high-flying, warm-blooded vertebrae with the great eyesight. Let us trust we can develop both in the years ahead. I am optimistic we can because I'm aware of the foresight and wisdom of my colleagues. Kinesiology, like every profession, always a work in progress that must be constantly improved, consistently justified, and incessantly stewarded, will certainly be better for it, and by extension, all members of society. It would be potentially beneficial in an assortment of different ways, perhaps ensuring we could speak with veracity that kinesiology is really a discipline rather than a loosely linked subgroups. If asked once again to rationalize to the National Research Council why the field's doctoral programs deserve to be included in its highly prestigious taxonomy. Perhaps it would even allow us to convince the National Research Council that kinesiology is a field whose interdisciplinary approach qualifies it to be listed under the categories of the humanities and social and behavioral sciences just as much as the biological and health sciences. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, additional high-flying birds with great vision and an interest in canvassing broad landscapes might provide additional meaning and help defend against those who belittle and trivialize play, games, exercise, sport, and other human movement forms we hold most dear. It is the least we can do for our professional forebears and the next generation of kinesiologists. Thank you.